People worry about being good at it, like it's this external set of skills. Being good is out of your control because it's just about chemistry with the person. My name is Christina Catherine Martinez.
Do you remember what grade your sex ed started in?
I remember 6th grade was the first time seeing any sort of like sex education videos or having any of that. And then there was nothing like 7th and 8th grade. And then my freshman year of high school, there was one video talk session that was more about sex. And it was just taught by, I think it was just taught by the English professor, the English teacher. I think there was no designated sex person in any of this. And I could tell, even especially in high school, that the English teacher did not want to be dealing with this. He was just like going through the motions of some kind of curriculum or sheet he was given. My middle school was Granada Middle School. It was in Whittier, La Mirada, Southern California. And then I went to La Serna High School and graduated in 2002. I guess without really thinking about it, I've identified as straight my whole life, but this year I've definitely opened myself up to a lot of queer experimentation. So I think queer is the best blanket term to describe where I'm at right now.
Do you remember what age you became interested in sex?
I was probably 10, because it was definitely before I started going to public school, which was like, 11 or 12. And I do remember being like turned on by stuff on the television and like, oh, it feels funny down there. And like kissing neighborhood boys when I was little. But I think even that, like when I was actually, experimenting with like other kids, that felt more like we were just sort of trying to mime or mimic like stuff we had seen, and it wasn't really about ourselves. You know what I mean?
Did you go anywhere for information? And if so, where? Friends, books, TV, internet?
Well, I didn't have the internet then. I mean, it's a joke. You just kind of fumble around and you learn on the streets, the suburbs. They were paved, they were residential streets, so it wasn't like that kind of, we learned on the streets. But yeah, it was a bunch of neighborhood kids running around, diddling each other and trying to figure out what we liked. I think that's it in a nutshell, in terms of like discovering our sexuality, like discovering my sexuality when I was really young.
Did you ask your parents what sex was?
No, my parents were very religious, and it just felt, it from the get-go, just sort of modesty and abstinence till marriage was something that I was raised with. So my parents never felt like, especially when I was younger, never felt like people that I wanted to broach that subject with.
Do you remember anything that you learned in the videos staying in your mind, affecting how you behaved with other people sexually?
No, not at all. Not at all. The videos, I was thinking about this before you came, just trying to remember like anything that really stuck with me in terms of watching this stuff, especially in junior high. And it was so technical and it was so medical. Even the puberty videos, which are supposed to be about, your own body changing, it just didn't feel like I was looking at anything that had anything to do with me. And we were all just kind of bored. And then, on the way out, the girls give you a deodorant and a pad. Like a giant, those like diaper cheap pads. I think what it was, I didn't grow up with any sisters, but I think it was definitely through the way I actually learned about my body and my period and what was going on was through my friends' older sisters. That's where it actually happened. So I think, it came out when we'd be like showering or changing into bathing suits. And then I noticed, I'm like, what? I'm like, how do you have hair and I don't? And they were like, oh, well, so-and-so said it's like this and that. And like, it's chill, it's going to happen. And that just felt more, that felt less weird than seeing a weird like cross section of my sliced up body and like dots moving around. I'm like, I have no idea what the dots correspond to. And I have to put this diaper in my underwear. And I definitely, the one thing my mom said, I discovered my period kind of on my own and I freaked out. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I remember we didn't really talk about it. So I wasn't quite ready for it to happen. And I thought it was really traumatic. And I told that was the one thing I finally went to my mom with. And I was like, what's going on? She goes, oh, you have your period. So here you go. But she wanted me to, and this is the thing that happened to a lot of my girlfriends, is that their moms wouldn't let them wear tampons. We had to sneak tampons because she thought tampons broke your hymen, and that if your hymen broke, then Jesus wouldn't love you as much or something. So yeah, it was definitely like a secret, like an underground, like a Silk Road of tampons that kind of happened in junior high. It sucked. I had to get tampons from my friends' older sisters. Yeah. The sex ed in high school, I think it was this week-long unit of watching videos, and it was more focused on, the video in junior high was just about how sex worked, and there was seemingly no presumptive connection between what was going on in the video and anyone watching it. The only thing I actually remember from the videos is this camera shot. Somehow they got a camera inside a woman, and it showed a dick coming inside a woman, and it was just this weird, and it had to look this like amniotic red gooey shot, and there's just this giant penis head, and it made a noise. I don't know if they added that in post, but it made like a shotgun noise. And at that point, I was on the younger end for my grade. I was 13. There were kids who were maybe 15, and I'm sure not everyone, a lot of kids were already actually having sex at that point. And we were all like categorically horrified. But I remember specifically that the teacher, this was so lame too, because the teacher clearly, I think it was probably in the curriculum that he had to, specify X number of contraceptive methods or talk about all of them. But he was clearly so skewing everything toward just not having sex. So there was a day where he went through all the contraceptive methods and then talked about pros and cons. And of course, like, the cons list was so long for everything, like, well, condoms are blah, 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 and you're gonna forget, and like, the pill does this to you, and it's gonna make you fat and tired, and this does this. And then, the last contraceptive method was abstinence. And he's like, well, it's like, it's safe, it's free, it's like, and the cons, I don't know. And I'm like, I was 13. And I'm like, the con is we're not fucking. Even though I wouldn't for like another 5 years. I mean, that is self-evident that that's the trade-off of not having sex, is not having sex. Yeah, and then after that, there was nothing. Freshman year of high school was the last any of that stuff was spoken about. LGBTQ issues were not discussed in any sexual program ever in life, in the world. Just at least where I was at. I think the fact that gay sex and just any other type of sex between like different orientations and different gender identities, the fact that it was not broached at all, kind of contains its own assumptions and frankly values about what sex is. Because we are given this video, we're given this like week-long curriculum. This is all about sex, but we're actually only talking about dicks and vaginas between like a man who was born a man and a woman who was born a woman. And to have sex completely circumscribed by that on an institutional level that's a pretty strong statement when you think about it. I remember my cousin, my male cousin, asking me one time when I was in 6th grade, like, is it true that like women's nipples get hard when they get turned on? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then I remember like asking a girl, and she was like, are you serious? And I'm like, kinda. I do remember that after the sex video in junior high, the next day in class, there was like a woman, presumably a doctor or a sexual expert of some sort. And we were allowed to write questions anonymously on index cards and then give them to her. And then she read them aloud in front of the class. But even then, even anonymously, people were kind of weird and embarrassed. And there were questions like, can you use a Ziploc bag instead of a condom? Like, can a woman get pregnant if you like shake a bloody rabbit's foot, like on the moon solstice? We had no idea what was going on. And it didn't feel very productive because she was trying to take it seriously. But every time someone read a question, it was so wild and so out of left field that everyone would just start laughing. So that was just kind of like a exercise in kind of group humiliation, I think, which would prepare me later for just group sex. The horniest kids in high school were definitely the choir kids and the theater kids. Now everyone thinks that like the popular kids are the ones boning all the time. It's choir kids. So I remember just rumors. I mean, there was rumors like, oh, I heard so-and-so, like I heard that people like boned on this couch in the theater room and that's why they threw it away. And it's like, well, when they threw it away because it was old. Oh, what I learned about having sex when I first had sex was that it stops when he's done. I have learned since then that more developed and self-aware and generous partners, that's not always the case, but especially maybe just growing up in sort of suburbia, and so after the first time I had sex and then subsequent times, like for the next couple years, that's what ended sex. It's like, oh, okay, when guy comes, then it's over. And then like, I'm not sure what I'm getting out of it. Oh my God. I can't even remember when like orgasms actually came up. That never ever came up at all in any of the sex education, any of the videos. And even among our peers, and I think maybe none of us were actually having them because we were just used to like, that the guy gets off and that's what happens. And it's like guys get to learn about their orgasms because it's so tied to the procreation process, and so they only learn about it by default. They're like, oh yeah, this feels good, and this is when it's done. I did have a nice young man that I lost my virginity to. He was the first person to go down on me, which was really great. And I remember feeling kind of weird because I was like, how do you know how to do this? And he said, oh, it's because of porn. He's like, you shouldn't get weird about like guys watching a lot of porn because that's how I know how to do this stuff. That was the first time that I'd been with someone who was completely focusing on my pleasure. But I'm sure as many other people can tell you that people who grow up on porn as a mirror or like using that as their model for how sex works, they usually do not have like a very generous sexuality if that's where you're getting it from. So weird. The first few times, he was my first boyfriend and the person I lost my virginity to. The first few times he went down on me, it was really overwhelming and almost upsetting because I'd never had anyone actually pay that much attention to me and my body and my freaking pussy. And I'd never felt that good. It's kind of messed up. Like that having that much attention paid to me and having that much pleasure was kind of like almost traumatic.
Did it make you feel guilty? Like
oh,
spending too much time?
Totally. Yeah. I just felt guilty in general that this like shouldn't be happening because I'd internalized so much of that like shame that I grew up with. And I think when you first start having sex, there's this weird almost reverse shame about like not having enough or feeling bad if you don't feel like having sex. And I think part of taking control of your own sexuality is like, just realizing what your sexual like appetite or, is in general. And for some people it's lower or higher. And for some people they go through periods of being low and high, and that like, frankly, the absence or like a lack of interest in like sex is its own kind of sexuality. I've met ravenous nymphos and I've met people who are completely asexual, and those are all valid sexualities. Because especially at a time, I think it has a lot to do with adults not accepting the fact that no matter what you say, people are going to experiment with their bodies and people are going to try to have sex like as they're discovering that. I think if you just come from that assumption, and if there was just a little bit more attention and care on, frankly, the actual personal side of like having sex, that would have been so much more helpful in general.